Hello, my name is Chris Gates and I'm your host. Today's guest is someone I've had the pleasure of working with over many years, first as a client and then as a partner, and someone whom I always respected for their integrity and their relational approach to sales leadership. Today's guest is Chris James. Chris, please, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me. It's a real privilege and a pleasure. Yeah, my name's Chris James. I spent nearly 40 years in the corporate world, largely selling huge pieces of software to retailers across the globe. And as well as doing that, in the last 5 or 6 years prior to retiring, me and my business partner, Will O'Brien, run a very small training and consulting business. So that's essentially what I did in my corporate life. I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a grandfather, and I've got lots of outside interests, which I'm sure we'll touch upon. But yeah, that's me.
So let's start with our opening question then. What does midlife mean to you?
I was pondering this the other day as I was preparing. Of course, life is a physical thing, because I guess when I was born in 1965, the average age expectancy was about 69. So midlife would have meant that I would have been about 35. Now, over the course of the last 50 years or so, it's gone up to, life expectancy is 79 now. So I guess that means midlife for me is about 40. But the reality is I'm not 40. I'm actually knocking on the door of 60, believe it or not. And so essentially midlife, I think for me, is more of a mindset than is a physical thing. And I guess the way I look at midlife is that I look at it like any other part of my life, whether I was in my 20s, or my 30s, or my 40s, or my 50s. It's just another stage of life that we have to find a way of navigating through.
And I think that navigation is one which we're going to sort of draw upon, because during your midlife, you've done a couple of major pivots, right? First from corporate to sort of SME and startup, and then more recently into retirement. So let's take the first of those and think about that first pivot you made to move out of the corporate nest. Tell me how that was for you and how you made that decision.
Yeah, I mean, look, corporate life suited me down to the ground. My actual background, when I started in this crazy industry back in 1983, was in a very small computer company based in the city of London. We employed literally 40 people. It was a family-run business. And then over the period of time, what I kind of recognized was that I was much better being a small cog in a big wheel, if you like. And so the corporate life for me absolutely suited me. I enjoyed the challenge of it. I enjoyed the security of it. I enjoyed the breadth of opportunity that it gave me. So when I decided to leave the corporate world and the big kind of corporate organizations that I'd worked for, it wasn't a quick decision. It was a decision that I'd had many, many conversations about with my wife. I'd had many conversations actually about with the company that I was working for at the time. The reality is I wanted to travel a whole lot less. I wanted to get some time back. I wanted to do something different. I wanted to challenge myself in a different way. And the reality is that those opportunities just didn't present themselves. So I rowed my own boat, which is what I've always tried to do. Someone said to me, Chris, you've got to row your own boat. And I thought, what does that mean? I kind of know now what it does mean. I rowed my own boat, so to speak. And about a year before I left the corporate world, I set myself this deadline to say I was going to leave whatever the case. And I told my, bosses and masters at the time, and I made the conscious decision to leave whatever the situation, confronted me with. And so I guess that was the decision that I took. The learnings from me coming out of it was, ultimately I did take my time. And if people have got the opportunity to take their time when they move from a big corporation to a much smaller organization, which is what I did do, then take your time. I'm conscious that I was of the benefit, I had the benefit of time. Not everyone has the benefit of time, but I did. And I think the reality is that you have to also rest before roles sometimes. Now, again, I'm speaking with the benefit of having the opportunity to have had rest between roles. But I would always recommend that, particularly when you're taking a large jump from a much bigger organization to a small organization, or you're doing something fundamentally different, that you have to rest. Because what I didn't really appreciate was, particularly the last role that I had, it took a lot out of me. It took a lot out of me physically. emotionally. You know, I was traveling a lot. I was, you know, I was on planes at crazy hours. I was spending weekends away. I was just doing a lot of things, and I guess that kind of drained me a lot. And so, therefore, taking time out to rest is a really, really good thing to do. And then finally, you know, I think the other thing that I'd say is that when you're moving and you're making that pivot, do your due diligence. You know, do a huge amount of work to think about the
Yeah.
organization that you're potentially moving to, the kind of environment you're moving to, because I don't think you understand the wrapper that comes with working with a big corporation and what that gives you in terms of the kind of benefit and the security it gives you. And not all kind of big process changes or big ideas or big challenges that you may have faced in your corporate world necessarily suit themselves to an SME context, right? And so, therefore, what I also discovered was that actually I couldn't just bring big business thinking into an SME and it would work automatically. And so, therefore, if in with the benefit of hindsight, if I'd have done much more due diligence in relation to that initial move, I would have realized that.
And that's a really interesting point. As people are thinking about doing that due diligence when they're making a big move, have you got any questions that, from your experience, would be helpful to
I
ask?
think it's about honesty, and it's about asking the most difficult questions about yourself, actually,
Mm.
which is how on earth am I going to fit into this organization? How on earth am I going to bring the thinking that I have and the things that I've learned working for a much larger organization and some of the security blanket that comes with that? How on earth am I going to bring those to a much smaller organization? Of course, you should always do the due diligence in relation to the company, in terms of their financial performance, in terms of their company structure, in terms of their customer, in terms of their market, and all the other things that you'd expect to do. But I think a lot more thinking needs to go on about you and your own experience and how you can pivot into bringing that experience into a large organization and being realistic about what you can and can't achieve. And so, therefore, for me, one of the big learnings I had is that I didn't actually do enough due diligence. I kind of walked into the organization with actually the organization I worked for had a lot of integrity and a lot of great customers and a great offering. But actually, what I was trying to do with that organization wasn't suited in relation to my experience of bringing that into the SME. So, yeah, it's about a lot of it is about being honest with yourself, I think.
Very helpful, thank you. And I know you then took the move to
Yeah,
join Will in this
yeah,
startup, and I saw that brought you a lot of life
it is.
and joy. Do you want to talk about how it was for you personally as you made that transition and what you got
Yeah,
out of that chapter of your
yeah,
life?
sure. And I think the first thing to say is that a lot of people say they don't have regrets, right? Oh, I don't have any regrets. And like, it's this
Mm.
big kind of almost machismo thing about not having regret. I did have some regrets leaving that SME company because of the previous conversation around due diligence. So when I
Yeah.
was basically left thinking, what on earth am I going to do next? I was in the right place at the right time with Will. Will had set up this organization, Day Five Consulting, you know, some time prior to me joining. And actually, at the time of joining in 2020, it was just literally months before COVID. Will had 6 customers. He was doing this training and consulting business literally face to face. And then suddenly we had to pivot to this new world order, which was COVID, everyone working from home, everything had to be done on the basis that it was remote. And of course, that just sent us into a tailspin because we're in our mid 50s. And can we get hold
Mm.
of this new kind of digital world and create the materials in the context of a digital world rather than a physical world? And so I sat down with Will and we cracked our way through this over a number of months, and we managed to find a client that would take us on to train them, and we did that in the first few months of being together. And then we went on this incredible journey together, 4.5 years training over 4,000 people across 6 continents. We had a blast of a time. But Will was very, very generous to me. You know, he said, "Look, I can't pay you a dime. Just come on board, and we'll see how we go." And we had the best 4.5 years of our life, I think, for me anyway, from a corporate perspective. And I think what we kind of termed as was kind of a lifestyle business. So for us, this was about us deciding that we chose the companies we work with. We chose the work we wanted to do and pretty much chose the work when we wanted to do it. Now, again, I'm very conscious that when I say those things, that I have choice, and I know a lot of people don't have that degree of choice.
Mm,
But fundamentally, we still took a risk. We still had to create something. We still had to sell something. And we made what we thought was a success of it. You know, we had a very high satisfaction rate, up at 88, 89% satisfaction. So we were delighted with the work that we'd carried out. Um, but we took none of it for granted. But it was a beautiful landing pattern into the place of what we now call kind of retirement, which is not a word I'll come on to, but I even
mm.
like using that much. But again, it was an incredible pivot based upon everything I'd learned in my previous experience. And again, when we make these changes in life, I don't think we always appreciate just how much we've learned and how much of that is innate
Yeah.
within us, and that we can bring it to another context and it can still work. And I was talking earlier about big processes and big changes that may not necessarily work in an SME context as they would inside of as they do in a corporate context or an SME context. But actually, when I think about the work that Will and I did, we weren't classic trainers, but all of that experience that we brought to bear really, really helped us, and it helped our clients because we were very pragmatic. But we brought all that learning, which was just within us, to the table, and we made what we thought was a success of it.
And did you surprise yourself at any point in that
Completely.
startup?
Yeah, completely. Because again, we had no income. So, I was used to
Yeah.
income. I was used to getting a check every month. I was used to getting bonuses. I was used to getting shares. I was used to getting all sorts of things. None of that came our way. We
Mm.
had to really make things happen. And I suppose, yeah, something inside of both of us. I mean, Will had been doing this a little while before me, but something inside of both of us thought, actually, we can do this. We've got things that we can say. We're relevant. We are pretty good at what
Mm.
we do, and we can bring experience to bear. But I guess we didn't realize we could do it until we did it. And so therefore, of course, we were concerned. Where was the money going to come from? Where was the income going to come from? Running the business didn't take up a lot of cost, quite frankly, but you still got bills to pay, right? You still got mouths to feed. And so on that basis, we just threw ourselves into it. And again, our customers were so generous to us. We ended up with 21 customers, and all across the world. And our network that we've built up over the last 30 years really came into play, because a lot of the people that we basically did business with, that we'd helped, that we'd supported, that we'd managed, that had managed us, were very generous in relation to giving us the opportunity to help, bring the skills to bear to their organizations and their teams. So, yeah, there was a lot of surprises, but we had an absolute blast. It was a lot of fun.
Fantastic. And then more recently, you announced to the world you were stepping off LinkedIn,
Yes.
uh, bold move, and taking the step to
Yeah.
retire. So how did you make that decision to retire, and what does retirement mean to you now?
Well, I think there was a natural kind of order. We were both coming up to 60. I'm not quite 60. Will has just turned 60. And Will had always talked about the idea of wanting to step away from this when he was 60. And the reality is I didn't want to do this on my own. This business that we'd ran together, it was a partnership, it was a team, and we loved working with each other. And so therefore, although I wasn't probably exactly at the same stage that Will was at, I was kind of ready. We knew it was going to end at some point in
Yeah.
time, and there was a lovely natural closure to it. At the end of last year. And so when we then decided to, that's it, the business was over. We were going to go and do whatever we were going to do for the rest of our lives. We go into this weird term of retirement, which I'm just not a big fan of it. The reality is I'm still doing a load of stuff I love, stuff I want to do, stuff that keeps me busy. The only difference is I just don't get paid for it, anymore. So I think
Mm.
retirement is not a word I'm a big fan of. I'm just moving from one stage of my life to another stage of my life. And again, it's a mindset shift. I'm very fortunate, and my wife and I are very fortunate that we no longer need an income. And again, I'm saying that knowing that
Mm.
I'm very blessed and very in a very fortunate position of not needing an income at this stage, of my life. So I'm very aware and very conscious of that. But the reality is that when we decided that we were going to go into this kind of financial retirement position, Karen, my wife, and I both sat down and said, okay, how is this going to work? You know, how much money do we need? What are the things that we want to do? How are we going to spend our time? And we did spend a lot of time talking these things through and planning these things through. Because again, I think if I'd have left the last big corporation I worked for and just jumped off a cliff into financial retirement, I think it would have been an absolute disaster because I was running at such a pace. But the beauty of doing it the way that
Mhm.
I did it, and the way I think Will would say he did it, was that we had a lovely landing pattern into this kind of financial retirement space, into this next phase of our life. Because again, when I was working for Day Five, we were doing 3 or 4 days a week. We were doing 6 or 7 months a year, and it absolutely suited us. So that kind of nice, easy pathway into financial retirement really, really suited us well. So again, I'll be eternally grateful for Will for giving me that opportunity. And now we're in this space of, kind of financial retirement. Again, I think much more of it is about a mind shift, than anything else.
Thank you. And you mentioned Karen there,
Hmm.
your wife. How has, if we look across the different chapters of midlife and the journey that you've been on, how have each of those chapters impacted on the way that you live your marriage, which I know is absolutely central to you?
Yeah, I mean, we've been married for 38 years. We've been together for 42 years. I mean, we got together when we were 17 years old. So we've been together forever. And the reality is that I think now we're spending as much time, if not more time, we've ever spent together, apart from when we were first dating each other, before we got married. Yeah,
And does she still like you,
we're
Chris?
still alive. We haven't killed each other yet, so that's a good thing. But look, I mean, we're a great team. We're a great partnership, and I think
Yeah.
we have always sat down with each other and made big decisions together. And she's always understood that I have a need and a desire to do the things that I want to do. And I always have, and I always recognize that she has a need and desire to do the things that she wants to do. And we're two very, very different people. And now our worlds are completely colliding in relation to all the time that we're now spending with each other. It is it is a process that we had to work at, in every stage of our relationship, our partnership, and our
Mhm.
marriage, whether that's pre-children, in having children, children leaving home, now having grandchildren, now being together on our own in our house. We've always kind of sat down and worked these things through together and figured out, well, what does it mean to us and how are we going to navigate this thing? And the reality is, say, we are different people and we are getting used to being in each other's space. But the reality is that there's a load of stuff that I do on my own. There's a load of stuff that she does on her own. And there's a load of stuff that we do together. So it's trying to find that balance. The bottom line is we still love each other. We still want to be with each other. And I think that's the kind of bedrock upon
Great.
which everything else is based upon. So on that basis, it works. But I can't pretend that, particularly in the last 12 months, it hasn't had its moments of challenge because just of the way in which
Mhm.
I was singly mindedly focused in certain areas of my life. She was the same. She did certain things in certain ways. I did certain things in certain ways. And now our worlds are colliding and we have to navigate that. We've got to find a way of, you know,
Yeah.
I can't business process re-engineer the way that she did part of the stuff in the house, just so that she can't business process re-engineer the stuff that I did in some aspects out of the house. I'm not saying that's the kind of typical role model, but you know what I mean? It's like we have to find a way of working these things through. And we have found a way and we are finding a way. But it has its moments, but
Yeah.
we're still going strong.
Very good. It's really encouraging to hear. And thinking about your identity in the midst
Yeah.
of this journey, how has your identity been impacted through your midlife journey?
Yeah, I mean, identity is a big, big word and a big, big topic, and I'm not going to do it justice. But I see a lot of the people that I've worked with in the past, and actually people that are now not working in the corporate
Mm.
world, and I see a lot of people's identity wrapped up in the job that they did. The classic situation is you meet someone for the first time and you say, "Hi, how are you? What do you do?" And it's all about what do you do? And then you start going on a ramble about, well, I do this and I've done this and I'm that. And I think a lot of people, inadvertently get their identity wrapped up in the things that they do rather than the things that they are. And they tend to look at their identity in relation to their achievements, whether it's the big deal, the big team, the big title, the perks, the prestige, the salary package, whatever it might be, that almost forms their identity. And particularly in a commercial context, which is where I've spent most of my life, the reality is that we are beings that are constantly measuring and being measured against some sort of form of target. So our identity is always about the last quarter, the last fiscal, the last target you met or you didn't make. And so
Mm.
therefore, I've always tried to set myself aside from that and set myself apart from that. And so midlife for me, as I go through this stage of, change, is really no different. I've always tried to be the person that I was when before I started out in my corporate career when I was 18 years of old, right? First and foremost, I'm a
Mm.
Christian. Secondly, I'm a husband. I'm a dad. I'm a granddad. I'm a brother. I'm a son. I'm a friend. And first and foremost, the more successful I've been throughout my career, my life, I'm still conscious that actually that benefit of being successful is okay, but actually I've got to be true to myself and I've got to be the person that I've been created to be, identity in relation to having that degree of integrity that as you mentioned when you first came on the call. That's really important for me. Treating other
Yeah.
people as you'd be treated yourselves. Someone famously said, no one's going to remember what you did, no one's going to remember what you say, but people are going to remember the way you treated them, right? And the way they make you feel.
Yeah.
And so I'm really, really conscious of the way that I've managed people and managed teams and the way I've made people feel in relation to the way I've managed them. So I've always been very conscious of that. And so I'm hoping that fundamentally that's where my identity sits, as opposed to any accolades or achievements or awards or money I may have gained on my way through the journey.
Brilliant. I saw a real example of that, Chris, when I was traveling in Dubai a bit earlier this year and bumped into one of your former team members who still recalls fondly the time working for you and the best boss
Right.
he'd ever had. And I think the way that you'd built him and encouraged him and led him had definitely shaped the way that he worked and his life in that
Yeah, and,
corporate.
and
So
again that's
clear
because
evidence.
people have had impact, on me as well, right? And that's because of the
Mm.
way that I was brought up in it essentially, but also the people that I've surrounded myself with, which have been speaking into my life, and I think that's again, is about surrounding yourself with the people that are going to challenge you in relation to the way that you think and the way that you behave and being accountable in that sense.
Yeah. Why don't you just give an overview of some of the ways that people have spoken into your life and helped you in your journey to shape you and shape the work you've
Yeah,
done?
sure. I mean, when I look back, I think I've had 17 managers that have managed me since 1983. I would say about a third of them have been really helpful, and the others not so. You know,
See the show notes for the
yeah,
lists.
having a great boss isn't guaranteed, right? And so therefore, in your corporate life, in your work life, you know, it's being expected to be guided and shaped by certain individuals. It may happen for you, and I hope it does happen for many people that may be, listening to this. But the reality is, just mentioned, I've always surrounded myself with other people, with my community, if you like, that people that I've learned from, people I've been accountable to, you know, sometimes people have actually worked for me. People I've learned so much from the
Yeah.
people that have actually worked for me, as opposed to probably the people that I've worked for. My close, my family, my community of people that I've kind of lived life with. My wife that I've spoken about, she's still the most wise person that I've ever met in my life. And boy, does she keep me, accountable. And I think that's a really important part of when you're living life together, and especially when you're doing a huge amount of traveling like we've both done, when you're spending 20 years on the road, you need to have that kind of solid foundation of home life, but you need to be accountable to the person that means the most to you. I've had specific mentors in my life. They've come and they've gone. But the reality is, I've lived life with people since I was in my 20s. And the people that I grew up with in my 20s and 30s and 40s are still part of my life today. We've journeyed life together and we've been very, very fortunate. And my advice to anyone is if you can find people that you can journey life with, it's so important and it's so beneficial. Because when you kind of live life together through all of its ups and downs, you get to realize what real life is all about outside of the kind of corporate structure that you may, earn your salary from. The famous saying is, it takes a village to raise a child, right? And I think it takes a village to raise someone like me, quite frankly. My children often talk about the fact that they've been raised by a village as opposed to just raised by my wife and I, because of the way that we led our lives with the interaction of so many different people around us, largely because we had, we're a church-based family. So we've had a fellowship and a community that we've belonged to for the last 40 years. So surrounding ourselves with people that were of a different mindset, whether they were teachers, administrators, financiers, whoever may have been in our life, who have really spoken into our lives, meant that it's kept me grounded in relation to who I am and what I'm all about and what I believe in and how I take that into my work life. So yeah, people I've surrounded myself with and my family obviously have played a fundamental role in shaping who I am, for sure.
It sounds like you've been very grounded, Chris, and it's certainly reflected in the way that we've interacted over the years. And there's a lovely consistency running through the way that you work. But midlife's often thought of as a time when we shed things that don't fit us
Mm.
anymore. Are there things that you've had to let go of or shed as you've moved through these different stages of midlife?
Company cars, traveling
They don't fit you very
traveling
well.
business class or first class, um, get, getting on a train where you've got people that have got people. No, I mean, all jokes aside, the reality is that when you're a little bit pampered in a kind of corporate context, stepping away from that, you do have to realize, okay, well, that wasn't normal, right? And maybe for some people it is normal and good and good for them if that's their choices of life. But for us, it's not normal to get on a plane and turn left as opposed to turning right. So there are little things like that. There are little things in relation to purpose. The reality is that at certain points in my life, I was running a big team. I was running around the world. There was my diary was full, like 12, 14 hours a day, 5, 6 days a week. And, so that gives you a high degree of purpose. It also gives you a high degree of stress.
Mm.
So you have to realize that purpose has to be redirected. And I'm a purpose-driven person. And so therefore, I have had to take that purposeful nature that I have and point it in a different direction, which is why I'm involved in my church, which is why I'm involved in various charitable things that I'm involved in. I'm a trustee of many different charities now. So essentially that gives me the opportunity to speak into those situations using the experience I've had in my working life, but still giving me that purpose, but also recognizing in reality that time of my life has passed, and I have to be honest with myself and say it's not coming back, and as much as I loved it and I enjoyed it and I had a great time with it and I had a modicum of success as a result of the things that I was doing, it is about laying down those things and saying, you know what, Chris, those things don't exist anymore, and when you've got grandchildren that are running around your ankles, right? It gives you again a different perspective, right? Because what you realize is actually
Mm.
the time that I spent with my small children, I'm now getting back, and what a privilege that is. Now, again, not everyone's blessed in that way. I completely recognize that. but you have to find a way of taking your purpose and pushing it into something else. It could be exercise. It could be some form of sport. It could be giving yourself up for charitable endeavors. It could be consulting. It could be whatever you want it to be. But the reality is you can't help who you are. And the reality is you will slow down a little bit over time, but you still, if you're a purpose-driven person, you've got to point that somewhere. So just find somewhere where you can point it and try and make a difference.
I know one of the things you, excuse me, I'll cut that bit. I know one of the things you're excited about is your upcoming trip. Why don't you talk about that and how that aligns with your sense of purpose?
Yeah. So, yeah, thank you. So I'm involved with a charity called Stand By Me. They're a relatively local charity where I live. They've been going about 30 years, and the headmaster of a local school woke up one day, saw the plight of what was going on in Ethiopia back in 30, 40 years ago, decided that he wanted to do something about it. And lo and behold, 35 years later, there's a school in a place called Bekoji in Ethiopia, which has got 400 students who are largely abandoned and orphaned. And so we, as a group of 21 people, are going out there in October to make a little bit of a difference. There's some DIY activity going on, which I'm not great at. There's some leading of sporting activities. There's some lesson learning. There's lots of stuff that we're going to be involved in. But basically, the children in that school don't have much of a chance in life, and so we're there to kind of make a little bit of a difference to the week or the 10 days that they are there. And I think I'm going to learn more and get more out of that than the children are probably going to get from me, for sure. Being in a different context, being in a different environment, seeing what we're likely to be exposed of, I'm sure is going to, affect me in a positive way, and something that I will bring back with me and hopefully share with others, and then make me into a different type of person. But it's something I wanted to do for many, many years. Many of my friends and colleagues have done it. I've never had the opportunity of doing it because of my work situation, but I'm really looking forward to it. And it's something that the charity is an incredible charity. We're taking out 400 pairs of shoes. We're taking out food packages for the local village. So it's going to be a really exciting, informative and challenging trip. And yeah, I can't wait for it.
Fantastic. We'll include a link to your Just
Thank
Giving
you.
page in the show
Appreciate
notes
it.
for that. And then finally, Chris, what wisdom would you have liked to have known 10 years ago as you entered into midlife that would have helped you navigate this phase?
Yeah, I can't pretend to be the most wise of people. I'm much more pragmatic than anything else. But I think if I was going back to 10 years ago, I would have probably just said to myself, it's going to be okay, Chris. It's going to be okay.
Yeah.
The reality is 10 years ago, in a corporate world where I was traveling all over the place, working crazy hours and doing crazy things, doing really exciting things, I had certainly less time. I had less peace. I was striving more. I was rushing around, and I didn't know if it was going to be okay, quite frankly. There were moments of significant stress at that part of my life. But I think looking back, I would say to myself now, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay, Chris. And fundamentally, knowing it's going to be okay is really important. We've had our fair share of family challenges and up and downs, which haven't always been easy to navigate through. And again, trying to find that work-life balance, which everyone tries to strive for and talks about, is not easy. It's not easy at all. But I've tried to find a way of doing that, and I've tried to find a way of making it as okay as I possibly can do. So I'd go back to myself and I'd say, Chris, it really is going to be okay. And actually, I'll take okay. Okay is enough for me. I don't need it to be more than okay. So I'd say to myself 10 years ago, yeah, Chris, don't worry, it's going to be okay.
Fantastic. And that's a great place to finish. Thank you so much, Chris, for your time, your candor, and your insights. It's been a joy to speak to you.
You're welcome, Chris. And it's been a pleasure and a joy to speak to you. And I really wish you well in this venture. I hope it goes great for you. Thanks for having me. Take
Thanks,
care.
buddy.